technical.
All right, we're working.
So is that candy?
It's gonna take a second.
Yeah, it's going to take a second. I'm pretty sure that we're working.
It's metering on the.
It is. It's going on the thing. Okay, so if you missed all that, welcome to the live stream. All we were doing is just welcoming you guys the whole time. That's what we were doing. So basically what we were saying is that a few weeks ago, we had graduation, which kind of took a break in our series that we were doing of our core values and our mission as a church, which is to help people be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. So we are taking the next few weeks, and we started with Be With Jesus a few weeks ago. We're continuing the conversation today with Become Like Jesus, and then next week we will do the Do What Jesus Did section of our mission statement. When we did this first conversation a few weeks ago, I think it's my favorite one that we've ever done, and we potentially will redo a lot of these and focus on different aspects. So if you remember the Be With Jesus section, we went through all the ways that we can be with Jesus, and we focused in on the fasting one. You guys had a lot of questions about fasting. We talked a lot about it, and I think it was really, really good, really practically helpful. So for everybody online, if you have questions today, put them in the chat. We're going to be in the chat with you guys. We're going to be interacting with you guys, and we're all going to be taking notes together. It's going to be good. So you guys ready?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. So, become like Jesus. So, be with Jesus, and now become like Jesus, the second stage of our mission statement. So, I'll first want to start off the conversation just by getting your thoughts. What do you think it means to become like Jesus? Like, when you hear that phrase, what's the first thing that pops in your head? Go for it.
I think when everyone says, like, what would Jesus do? You know?
Nice.
I think that's like, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, go for it.
Kind of like what he just said, doing exactly what Jesus did, and like having the heart of Jesus.
Having the heart of Jesus. Okay, that's great. What about you?
Like something from small group in 252, like when we talked about how Jesus was obedient in death, was like being obedient in like every aspect of our lives.
Okay, yeah, that's great. That's really good. Yep.
I think about like having the mind of Jesus and like you know, my thoughts would be in line with his thoughts,
Right.
and like, you know, you're not so worried and you're not so anxious about everything, and you kind of are able to conquer those thoughts in your head.
Yeah, that's great. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what y'all just said. So you talked about what would Jesus do? Kind of answering that question to help you find the answer and then replicate that in that moment, right? And then we talked about what you just said, and then as Montrell was talking about, remind me, what was your thing again?
Having the heart.
Having the heart of Christ, right. So what do you think then the Bible says for you to do to get to the place where you have the mind of Christ, the heart of Christ, where you can answer the question, what would Jesus do right now? Like, what do you think the practices are? Like, practically, tangibly, what do you do today to become like Jesus today? Okay.
Reading the Word.
Reading the Word, okay. That's good. Yep.
I think, like, prayer is big because you can't be like Jesus if you don't really know who he is.
Yeah.
You know?
That's great. Yep.
Trusting in God.
Trusting in God. That's good. Choosing in the moment to trust in God and not in yourself is good. So it's funny because what y'all just said is what we talked about in the first section, the be with Jesus. So which is good because there should be, you're doing it wrong if there's not. There should be a correlation that as you be with Jesus, you naturally should become more like him. So the more that you're spending time with him, talking to him, having conversation with him, then the more that you find yourself replicating what he did in his word, right? So, I mean, that just kind of makes sense, right? Like, you think about your friends, you have kind of cliques, you know, skater kids hang out with skater kids, like whatever, you know, it's like you have all these people. Well, there's a reason that that's true is because you start picking up the interests of the people that you're around, right? So if you're starting to be around Jesus and be with Jesus more, then it's natural that his passion and desire for your life will start to be something that you actually start to live out, right? So the Bible does give us a few very specific things that are not necessarily in the category of the be with Jesus section. So all those things are true. So we're going to compound on those things. So we're going to say that you should be doing all those things. You should be praying and fasting and spending time in the Word and in worship to be with Jesus. But as you are being with Jesus, what can you do to become more like him and focus on these specific things to practically, tangibly try and become more like him, right? So here's some things that we've got. You guys ready? Okay, so we're gonna throw these down real fast, and then we're gonna open it up for questions. If anything sticks out to you, then hang on to it, write down the question, and then ask it when we open it up for questions. Okay, make sense? Why do we do that? Because great leaders ask great questions. Great. Okay, here we go. Number one, the first thing you can do to become like Jesus is you can deal with your past. Dealing with your past. That means different things for a lot of us. So a lot of us have like a really rough past. Some of us don't really have a past. We're just kind of like, I just kind of grew up in the church and like I'm just kind of here and like whatever, you know? So for most of us, our family of origin is the single greatest influence on our life, for good or for evil. So not so much the things you've done or the things that have been done to you, but looking at your family environment, how you've grown up, the past, the home environment, the life that you've had up until now, you got to deal with that. Good, bad, ugly, you got to deal with your past. There's many ways that we can do that, and we'll get into those in a second. But that's the first thing, deal with your past. Second thing is discovering your identity and calling. Discovering your identity and calling. Knowing who you are and who God made you to become is a profound realization for every single follower of Jesus. For every single one of you, to know who you are and who God made you to be is a huge part of your life. I've heard it said this way before. This is true for everybody online too, is that the greatest day in your life is the day you were born. And the second greatest day in your life is the day that you figure out why. So when you find your purpose and your calling, there's a piece of you that comes alive because there's a passion, there's a revelation of God has called me for this thing, for this moment, for this time, to do this thing. So as you spend time with Jesus, you can spend time focusing on how God has made you, who he's called you to be, and discovering your identity and your calling. Some of those things are very black and white in the Bible. Every single person is called to fulfill the Great Commission. How you do it changes a little bit depending on your gifting. That's why God has given us giftings and all that stuff. So that's the second thing. Third thing, forgiving as we have been forgiven. That is the third thing you can do to become like Jesus. Is releasing those who sin against us from our right to collect on a debt of offense. So just because you were offended does not give you the right to hang on to that offense and to hold it against somebody. So continually living in a practice of forgiving as we have been forgiven is the third way that you can tangibly, practically today become more like Jesus. To let go of some things that you've been holding on to because of offenses or whatever. All right, that's number 3. Number 4 is community. 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 I think it's interesting that you look all throughout the Bible and you see the value of community. You see the 12 disciples. You see that Jesus had the 72, he had the 12, he had the 3. He had these kind of like tiers of people that he pulled in close because he desired and knew the power of relationships and community. He had super intimate community. He had community that was really still intimate, that did life with him every single day. He had the 72 that were they weren't as involved as the 12 disciples, but the 12 disciples had this community with him that was so important. And I think it's funny how we see that all throughout Jesus' life, and yet still today try to do life on our own. Right. So for us, one of the things that we can always be doing is evaluating, am I investing into life-giving community? Right now, today, what I can do to become more like Jesus is to connect and invest into the life-giving relationships that are around me. Okay, number 5? Number 5. Number 5, simple living.
That's a magazine.
Is it? Interesting. Simple living. Simple living is what you can do. So I think that there's a lot. Okay, perfect plug here. 252, this morning, what did we talk about? We talked about time management. Time is limited. Time is very limited. What?
I was gonna finish the point,
Oh, finish it.
but I forgot it. I was
That's funny.
So ready.
You were ready. I was like, okay. So the truth is that the amount of things that you can do, like we said this morning in class, the amount of things that you can do is unlimited. There's so many things you can do. You can do so many things. You can choose to try to do so many things because the amount of things that you can do is just, it's literally endless. The amount of time that you have is very limited. I was like, that's the right word. It's very limited. So the truth of the matter is that just like Jesus, we talked about that this morning, is that if we want to become more like Jesus, then one of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to start managing our time well so that, just like Jesus, we're not in a rush. We operate out of margin. We can be someone who invests into people and is not just so task-oriented because I'm behind, but yet he didn't rush anywhere and he still got everything that he needed to get done, right? So, simple living. There's a lot of that. Like Paul even charges us in the New Testament, call you to live a simple and holy life. Don't try to do everything. Focus on the next right thing. The thing that God's called you to do. How many of you right now in high school and middle school are freaking out because you don't know what you're going to do after high school or college? Right, everybody. Everybody's like, I could do this and then I could do that and whatever. There's so many different things I could do. At the end of the day, the thing that Paul is charging us with is focus on the things that you know you have to do today. So focus on being with Jesus today. Focus on forgiving others. Focus on the things that God's called you to do. And at the end of the day, if there's a decision that's coming up in your life, you don't need to figure out the whole scene because the whole scene's not for you to figure out. You won't be able to. You just need to figure out how to do the next right thing. Simple living. It's something that the American mind does not mesh with. We don't understand what that's like. But we have to prioritize and schedule our day around those priorities. It's literally what we were talking about this morning. So really, really helpful. Okay, 6, right? Number 6?
Yeah.
Okay, number 6. This one is interesting. So I'm just going to give it. We'll talk about it. Embrace grieving and loss. And everybody just had the same reaction. Everybody was like, yeah. Embrace grieving and loss. Embrace grieving and loss. Got it? The very last thing, we'll throw this out and then we'll jump straight to questions, is develop a rule of life. Develop a rule of life. That is something that you can do today to become more like Jesus. Because Jesus had one, believe it or not. So as you look at Jesus' life, he was focused on one thing. He had a mission. He had a vision. He knew why he was here. He knew what he was called to do. He had a rule of life that he lived by. And I think that's something that oftentimes we don't really think about that. We don't think about what that means for us, like a rule of life. Like, what do y'all think a rule of life means?
Like a law for your everyday living.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Like a rule that you live your life by.
Mm-hmm.
Like how to live your life.
A code or a set of values that you put your behavior up against.
Yep. Yeah, Tara?
Probably like something that you know, like you're gonna keep, like excuse is never gonna be broken.
Right.
Or changed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. The way that I have it put down is Christ-like values that you have pulled from the Bible to use as a filter on every decision you make. Every decision you ever make in life, it goes through these values that I've pulled from Jesus' life. It's going to go through these values. It's a rule of life. I don't make a decision. I hold myself accountable to this filter of how I live my life. It's a rule of life, right? So if you can practically do those things, a lot of those things are very difficult to figure out, like, well, what does that mean? Like, I don't, it's like, it's easy for us to say, well, like, I'm trying to become like Jesus today. Well, what's that mean? I'm trying to become like Jesus. Well, what that means is I'm trying to make decisions that I know line up with the values of Christ. I'm trying to deal with my past. I'm trying to discover who I am in Christ. I'm trying to discover who he calls me to be. Like he's calling me to be a son and a daughter of him and what my calling is. I'm trying to forgive the people in my past that have hurt me, or the people that I've hurt. I'm trying to forgive people. I'm trying to invest in community. I'm trying to live a simple and holy lifestyle, one that's very pleasing to God and not just doing a lot of things. I'm trying to do the most important things and be great at those things and not just good at a lot of things. I'm trying to embrace grieving and loss. I'm trying to be real with my feelings, but know that they don't lead, my decisions do. I'm trying to be real with what I'm going through. I'm trying to figure out, why am I grieving? What's happening? God, what are you doing in the restoration and the healing process to work through this situation? Romans 8:28, how's that true in this situation? And like I said, the develop a rule of life. So I think that's very practical in that sense, right? Okay, so is there anything that stuck out to somebody that you want to talk about? You got any questions? Yep.
What's an example of a rule of life that you have or you know that someone else has?
That's a great question. So I'm trying to figure out if I want to tell you one of mine or if I want to tell you somebody else's. I know that... Huh?
Some secrets you're keeping from us?
No. So there's one that maybe I'll share mine in a second, but I'll share this one first. Rick Rayford has one that he says all the time, and I think it's fantastic. It's very centered around parenting, and I latch onto it now a lot because I'm a parent now. So he says that through every decision that he makes as a parent, and he helps his kids kind of process through it as they make decisions, is he wants all of his kids to have God's best for their life. If you want God's best, obey God. Like, so he's looked at Jesus' life. The verse literally that we read 2 days ago in 252 is Hebrews 5:7-8. Is that Jesus, though he was the Son of God, learned obedience through his suffering. So Jesus even needed to learn obedience. So there's something about learning obedience to God, but trusting, even though it's difficult in the moment, that if I obey God, then I will have God's best for my life. So I'm going to filter that through every decision that I make. Am I making this decision because it's easy? And if it's hard, do I not want to make it because it's just hard? Or am I going to trust God right now? I'm going to obey what I feel like he's calling me to do, and then just trust that the best will come after that. So, and I think that you can even take that a step further. How do you know if it's God's best for your life? How do you know if it's something that he's calling you to do? Well, is he calling me to restore a relationship that is broken? Is he calling me to ask forgiveness for somebody that I've hurt? Those things very easily line up with the Word of God and kind of help direct you in that sense. So I think that's one of his kind of staple ones. So that's good. Yeah. Anybody else? Yep.
What does simple living look like?
What does simple living look like? I think it depends on who you are. So, for example, I think that there's very specific things that the Bible says, like you should, like, I think in a very simple frame of mind, simple living, it could be as simply stated as having your priorities straight. So simple living, if I know that I receive my identity, my affirmation, my approval from God, my relationship with God is first. Think about that. If God is your source of life, you receive all those three things from him and nothing else, then how much more in life do you really need? And how much more that you add to that equation is just pulling your attention away from God versus obeying God to do that thing, right? So you can do a lot of things in the sense of feeling accomplished and taking pride and saying like, oh, I can do a lot of things for God, but has God called you to do all those things? Or is that just pride driving your self-esteem, right? So really it's filtering like, God, I know that my approval, my identity, my affirmation comes from you. I'm focused on you first. I desire you more than anything else. Now, anything else that is added to my life is only going to be added if you're calling me to do that thing. It's not going to be, I'm just going to chase all these degrees and opportunities and jobs just because I feel like it's a good thing to do and I feel like I need to just fill up my life so I have some kind of meaning and purpose. You know what I mean? Because that's a very active life. You're doing a lot, but you're not going anywhere. It's kind of like we talked about this morning. Is that you kind of have a really chaotic hamster like going in a wheel, but it ain't moving. You know what I'm saying? But God has, I think that God just has favor on a simple and holy life. Its only desire is to be pleasing to God, to say yes to what you call me to do, to be pleasing, to just do the next right thing. Literally, like Moses, I think was a great example of that, because in Moses' life, we see so many times where he could have gone and done something and taken a matter into his own hands and tried to do something. But at the end of the day, he said, I am not going to do this unless you go with me. If you're calling me to do it, then let's do it. But if not, then I'm not doing it. Why would I waste time on something that God's not calling me to do? You know, it's like there's all that's kind of a tension that he lived in, and I think he lived in well, you know. So, yeah, that's a good question, though. Yeah.
There was a question in the chat.
Question in the chat online. Let's go.
What are ways to deal with your past?
What are ways to deal with your past? That is a great question. I think my answer to that would be another question. It would be like, what are you trying to deal with from your past? If you're trying to deal with trauma, probably a different route than, I think I got some like just family stuff I need to work out. You know, it's like if there's something that, like if you went through abuse as a child, you know, or something like that has happened, then the way that I would suggest going about finding healing and freedom from those things would be different than someone who is just trying to figure out some other stuff. You know, nothing really happened. They're just kind of like I kind of grew up in church my whole life, but I don't feel like I have meaning. Like there's some of that like from your family you've got to deal with. But what I would suggest is like let's say. I think in a very generic sense, I think that the first thing you want to keep in mind, regardless of how extreme your past is, what's been done to you, what you've done, whatever, the enemy has attacked every single one of us, and that is true for everybody. So I think one of the very first things to keep in mind and put as a filter for that is to know that God does not call you to deal with your past by yourself. And a lot of us try to do that, and we wind up worse than we did before. Because then we just spend time dwelling on it. We don't have somebody that can speak life into the situation and call out the lie of the enemy. And so you don't really, there's no realization of freedom through the process. You just kind of dwell on it. And that's not really what God's called us to do either. It doesn't say dwell in your past. It says get free from it, deal with it, you know. So the first thing I would keep in mind and just encourage everybody to do is that you're not supposed to do it by yourself. You need to talk to somebody. So if that is somebody, it's got to be somebody that you trust, that is trustworthy. It shouldn't be the friend that you've had for 2 weeks. You know what I mean? So that's what I do a lot of. So a lot of people like that I have conversations with, it's normally always dealing about, okay, this has happened. How's God moving through it? And how do we go from here? What's the best way to get from A to B? Because A is where you are and B is freedom. God wants you to live in freedom, away from the weight and the guilt and the weight of sin, you know, like that's not what we're supposed to live in. So I think the first step is talking to somebody else about it. Now, who you talk to, depending on what has happened in your past, will kind of determine that, you know. So I obviously, you know, if somebody comes to me about something, I don't pretend to be a professional counselor. Like I have godly counsel that I can kind of give, but if there's something that requires like some actual medical counseling, then we'll refer people we'll kind of walk them through that process and be with them through that process, you know. But I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind. Anybody that comes to me and asks that question, I would say the first thing to know is that you're not supposed to do it yourself. So how do you deal with your past? With other people. That's why small groups are the core of our church. We think that life change happens in the context of relationships. That's how you find freedom. Is you come in, you take off the mask, you open up, and then you get to hear somebody else say, wait a minute, you dealt with that too? And in that moment, there's freedom. It's like, wait a minute, I'm not the only one. We can deal with this together. We're in this together. You know, it's good. Any other questions? Yep.
How do you embrace grieving and loss? Do you have any strategies or tips or anything?
How do you embrace grieving and loss?
Why do you embrace it?
And why?
Girl, I'm sorry. I was gonna raise my hand earlier because like when you read that, you compared it. Well, not compared it, but like you used Romans 8:28, I think, to like talk about it. But
Right.
then I went to Romans 5:3-5, which
Okay.
basically says rejoice in your sufferings and like what comes out of doing that.
Right. So I think there's a lot of reasons. I think what y'all have both said is like how, like practically, and then like why. I think that kind of leads into like we could do a whole thing on just that because that's like a really big topic. I think that's a huge part of it is that there's a lot of I think that you can miss out on what God's trying to show you in the moment by pretending that things that didn't happen, or did happen, didn't happen. You know what I'm saying? So I think that it is true that people go through things that's just awful, and there's no explanation of like why did that happen. But what's also absolutely true is that God sees redemptive potential in every moment. So if that is true, then it takes a very mature person to sit down with someone and to say, God, I need you to help me see what you're trying to teach me through this thing. This really sucked. And it's okay to say that. And I think a lot of it comes from this idea that Jesus did not pretend like everything was just good in the world.
Right.
Like, that's not what he did. He actually came and did quite the opposite. He showed a lot of people who thought that was what they were supposed to be doing, just pretending like everything's good. And he came in and was like, bruh, let me flip this table and show you what's under it. You know, it's like all this junk is happening under the scenes that y'all aren't dealing with. And you got to deal with stuff. Like, if stuff is happening in your life, you can't pretend like it's not. You can't pretend like something that hurt you in the past did not hurt you, and then you're living out of offense your whole life. And I think that might be one of the biggest reasons is because if you don't, you'll never find freedom from that thing, and that thing will be, instead of the rule of life being your filter, the offense of that thing will be the filter for every decision you ever make. And that's a very dangerous place to be. So I think how you go about that, again, just like dealing with your past, because that's a lot of what that would be, dealing with your past, whether there's grief and loss in your past or just dumb mistakes that we've made in our past. Again, I don't think you're supposed to do any of these things yourself. I think you're always supposed to go to godly counsel, godly wisdom, and to ask and to say like, hey, like this happened, I need somebody to process it with. I want to find healing and freedom from this thing. And it doesn't have to be something that, it doesn't always have to be something that's just so crazy and blown up in this huge situation. It could literally be something very, very small that someone just said in a passing comment, and it just, you picked up an offense. And it's like, man, like I need to forgive that person. So I love what Jonathan said this past Sunday, how the early church practiced breath prayers, where it was literally just like something would come up in their mind and they would pray one of the three things. They would say like, God help me, God I need you, God show me. Like I just need you in this moment. Just forcing yourself to recognize that you're not supposed to do it on your own. You need God's help, So I think that's a lot of why, and I think that's a lot of how. It's like you don't do it by yourself. You go ask somebody, you talk to the right people about it. Because oftentimes it's not just like a one-time sit down and you're good. Like you got to have some conversations. You got to figure out where has the enemy come into this situation and planted lies that didn't actually happen. And then what did actually happen that you need to figure it out and work through if it was another relationship or something like that, So, yeah.
That's good.
Sweet.
How do you know when to like stop though? Like, how do you know when you should stop grieving and start, moving on and really learning from that?
How do you know when you should stop grieving and when you should start learning from?
And moving past it.
Because you say embrace grieving, like don't ignore it.
Right.
But when do you move on? Like when do you move past it?
When do you move on, and when do you move on from grieving? So, what do you think would be the light bulb that goes off that says, okay, I'm done grieving? Right.
Oh.
I don't think there is one. So, for example, I think that's why Peter said, and Peter and Jesus, as they have this conversation of, like, you need to, like, sometimes you have to forgive every day. But also sometimes you have to, I think this is kind of a stretch. This is like a very mature conversation like to have, but I think that there's a lot of people that their greatest pain in life has become their biggest point of ministry and power and testimony. And so what that means is there's potential that they don't ever just let go of what happened, but the ability that they have to embrace that loss and to grieve that thing is the thing that produces the power of God in their life to minister to other people about that thing. Because in my weakness, God shows his strength. So I think there's a lot of that wrapped up in that you have to realize that sometimes it's not, because that thing will never not be true, because if it happened in your past, it happened in your past. The fact that will always be true, there's a sliver of that where you may always grieve that thing. But you think about it, now what you decide to respond in the moment, if that grieving brings depression and anxiety or whatever, then you got to still keep talking about it. But if embracing that loss and embracing that grieving, if that is the source of testimony and power that you have in your life, for example, well, since we're talking about loss and grieving, the first thing you think about is death, right? When somebody in your family passes away, that may not be true for everybody, but that's kind of what you think. Yep, we're about to end it. That's kind of what you think of. Well, my grandfather and my grandmother, they both died on the same year. Okay, so when my grandfather died, it was like a huge thing in my life. I mean, it just, like, it could have taken me out. You know, it was awful. For me, he was like my guy. He was like the spiritual kind of like leader of our whole family. And when he died, it was just like Monday he was fine, Saturday he was gone. Like it was so fast. And it kind of became this thing where, of course I had a season where I had to grieve it, you know, but now when I think back on his life, the time for tears is gone. When I think back on his life, I don't cry anymore. I don't get upset about the fact that I feel like he was taken way too soon, it was just too fast, whatever. When I think back on his life, what I think about is, man, my papa, like he stood for family. He had so many opportunities to do so many great things that would have proved his family wrong, and he could have just done he could have done so many great things. But he said no to a lot of things because he chose to live a simple life, and he knew that family was most important. And one of the last things he ever told me was family is most important. So now when I think of my papa's life, all I want to do from that embracing of that loss is to go invest everything I have into my family. And to wherever I go, produce family. 252, that's family. This summer, that's the theme. This is family, you know. So I think that, I think it's different for every person, but I think that's what a lot of that, you know, potentially could look like. Again, depending on your situation, maybe a broken relationship, a lost family member, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. But I think that at the end of the day, you want to know that you can't do it by yourself, and you want to look at, God, what are you showing me in this moment? What are you producing in me out of this trauma, this thing that I'm experiencing? Because if you don't embrace it and you pretend like it doesn't happen, you'll live in that burden of that guilt or that shame, or pretending like it didn't happen. It'll be the filter instead of your rule of life. You know, you don't want that to be the case. So, yeah, cool. All right, that's it for tonight. So this is good. I'm really enjoying this. Y'all enjoying this?
Yeah.
This is good stuff. So next week we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the third thing, which is do what Jesus did. And we'll have a lot of super practical things just like we did tonight. Everybody online, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for all the questions. Anything I'm missing?
Nope.
All right, sweet. Y'all say bye.
Bye.